We'll call the February 12th, 2026 TAC Planning Committee meeting to order at 1:01 p.m. All right, so the first thing on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Does any committee member have any changes that they'd like to make to the agenda? Not seeing any or hearing any, we will approve the agenda as stated. Next, we have approval of the December 11th, 2025 TAC planning minutes. And for this, we're going to need a roll call. So Jed has got the minutes up on the screen and has skimmed through it. Does anybody have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved. Chris Hartzell, Woodbury.
Thank you, Chris.
Second, Lauren Dickerson, MPCA.
Thank you, Lauren. Jed, take the roll call, please.
Okay, Jorge Bernal, Anoka County. Mark Culver, Brooklyn Park. Drew Falmer, Carver County.
Aye.
Charlie Howley, Chanhassen.
Aye.
Scott Peters, Dakota County. Dan Patterson, Hennepin County.
Aye.
Bridget Reef, Metropolitan Airports Commission. Patrick Boylan, Met Council Community Development.
Aye.
David Burns, Met Council, MTS, or alternate.
Jed, this is Joe. I will be the alternate for Dave, and I.
Patrick Haney, Metro Transit.
Aye.
Bria Fast, City of Minneapolis. Gina Mitico, MnDOT, or alternate. Lauren Dickerson, MPCA.
Aye.
Kevin Roggenbuck, Ramsey County.
Aye.
Anton Jervy, City of St. Paul. Craig Jensen, Scott County.
Aye.
Sunita Kasashwa, Suburban Transit.
Aye.
Elaine Katsukos, Tab Coordinator.
Aye.
Sarah Allen, Washington County.
Aye.
Chris Hartzell, City of Woodbury.
Aye.
Chair, there were 13 ayes, no noes, and no abstentions.
Thank you, Jed. That motion has carried. We will move on to the agenda. Public comment on committee business. Do we have anybody from the public or staff? Did you get anything sent to you from a public?
There were no registrants, and I do not see anyone in the audience.
Very good. We'll move on to our business items, which we have none. So let's proceed to informational items. So the first one is Kyle Burrows from Metro Transit will present the arterial bus rapid transit plan update recommendations. Kyle, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, committee members. My name is Kyle O'Donnell Burrows. I'm the planning manager for Arterial BRT, and I'm here to share this information item, sharing our Metro Transit's recommendations for the J line and the K line following our Arterial BRT plan update that we've been undertaking this year. We've been to TAB a couple of times over the course of the year at each kind of major milestone, and we're at the Technical Advisory Committee of TAB last week, and this was our first stop at TAC planning here this week in this process. So what I'll go through today is a little bit of the process that we took to get to this point at a higher level, and then kind of sharing what our recommendations are out for the next arterial BRT lines to be implemented post H line, and then share a little bit of our next steps here as well. First up, a little bit of grounding on arterial BRT and sort of how it fits within our overall set of tools available to Metro Transit within our transit toolbox. So we have obviously a variety of tools available to us depending on kind of the specific transit-related need. And those tools tend to align on a spectrum of purpose, really ranging from kind of a more coverage-oriented purpose, where the goal is to provide a basic level of service to a specific geography, kind of making sure that we have some level of transit access in a particular area. So the really kind of the kind of primary example of that, or a primary example of that, is kind of more demand responsive style services like Metro Micro and the other services that the STAs have been doing, and kind of TransitLink as well. It's kind of scaling up that is sort of getting through our different levels of local bus, and then on the far end, on the ridership end of that spectrum, is arterial BRT, which is what we're talking about here today. And on the ridership side, what our goal really is to serve as many people as possible and generate as much ridership as possible, be as efficient as possible with our resources. So it's about serving as many people as possible. That tends to be in higher density population job centers with kind of a lot of walkable areas with a lot of people in those areas. And our transportation policy plan guidance sort of reflects those purposes, where we have kind of varying levels of productivity and cost per passengers guidance in the transportation policy plan. So we're expected to provide 25 or more passengers per in-service hour on arterial BRT. So that's a really high standard of efficiency and productivity. And consequently, the TPP directs us to focus primarily on transit market areas 1 and 2 for this style of service. For some context, many folks are aware of this, but we have 8 planned arterial BRT lines currently to be implemented prior to 2030. So the A line through the E line are in operation today, as of December. F line, G line, and H line are in various stages of engineering and planning. And the kind of key task for our work here was to identify what are the next 3 lines to be implemented between that 2030 and 2035 horizon. And we're preparing to submit the J line to the 2026 regional solicitation process. To get to that point, we've taken a 4-step process throughout this past year, throughout 2025, which is similar to what we did kind of the first time we did this in kind of that Network Next process in 2020 and 2021, where we started identifying a large set of kind of candidate corridors to consider. These are really drawn from high frequency routes, transportation policy plan guidance, that type of thing, and then narrowed down to a smaller set of the most promising corridors using a set of simpler screening criteria to help us really focus on what are the corridors we really need to be digging into in more detail. Having developed those corridors in more detail, we performed a more technical, detailed evaluation on those using some technical scoring criteria, and then ranked those corridors based on that technical score. Those technical score and that screening criteria, those are really important ways for us to kind of indicate where are the most promising corridors, on paper for arterial BRT. But that's not really the only factor, right? The other kind of critical factors are sort of applied in that prioritization step, where we're taking those corridors that are ranked and kind of assessing them on readiness, like how well do they fit within the network, some other criteria about roadway, and kind of then from there sort of selecting ultimately the J line, K line, and L line. So just a quick recap, many folks have been involved in this work, obviously either engaged directly or engaged through the TPWG. So you may have seen some of this work already, but this is sort of where we started with 17 candidate corridors. Applying those screening criteria narrows us down to these ultimately 11 corridors that were advanced for evaluation. So these, you can kind of see here the distribution of those 11 corridors and how they relate to the transit market areas in our region, which are, again, I think an indicator of, independent of transit service, where do we expect the most transit demand to be in our region? These are the 11 corridors that we ultimately applied those technical evaluation criteria to, and here are those results. So you can kind of see at a high level where things stuck out. So our technical evaluation criteria were really sorted into 4 categories around ridership, around equity impact, around cost of providing the service, and around kind of land use in relationship to kind of transit supportive land uses and kind of connecting key destinations there. Each criteria had a possible of 25 points possible. So a corridor could score up to 100 total points. And you can kind of see that distribution here broken down. We really ended up with kind of 3 corridors that stood out in our technical evaluation work: Nicollet, Franklin Grand 3rd, and West 7th Street. And then kind of from there, the corridors sort of stepped down at approximately equal intervals in those overall scoring criteria in that technical evaluation results, kind of on their way down from there. So applying that prioritization step, as I mentioned, those technical evaluation criteria are very important for us in terms of identifying which are those most promising corridors, but it's not the only step. So we started in this prioritization phase of kind of starting with those results, kind of working our way from top to bottom, and really asking ourselves, is there a reason that this corridor shouldn't advance? Do we have some unanswered questions about this corridor? And those unanswered questions are really drawn from a couple of sources, thinking about community and rider feedback that we gained kind of throughout this process that we have been undergoing since in 2025. So at every major milestone along the way, we kind of paused and kind of solicited feedback on the alignments, on terminal locations, any other kind of local knowledge or questions that we might have been gotten. So that really informed a lot of our thinking on kind of this potential step here. And then also thinking about kind of roadway implications and sort of how they work with roadway projects. So kind of passing through that step ultimately gave us the recommendations for the next lines for consideration. And just getting a little bit more detail on that readiness question. So we really asked ourselves 3 questions. First is kind of for each corridor, how compatible is that corridor, or is the roadway existing or planned with arterial BRT infrastructure and service? So basically the question is, does arterial BRT fit on this roadway here? And then asking the second question there is really about how well does the corridor fit within the overall existing and planned transit network? So thinking about the broader picture here, what does this corridor look like with respect to the other metro and planned metro investments? And then finally, are there major unanswered questions about the alignment specifically? So, do we have the right line on a map drawn for a particular corridor? And then finally, there's a timing element of this too, and that's where kind of are working with our roadway partners on kind of aligning those corridors that advance to sort of align with planned or existing roadway projects, so that we are not kind of going back and doing sort of 2 rounds of construction and adding the disruption that comes with that and kind of community impact and sort of achieving some of the efficiencies of potentially delivering these projects together. So having completed that work at the top level here, our recommendations are shown here. So we are currently recommending a J line and a K line, and then doing a little bit of additional work before we ultimately name an L line. So J line is recommended as the West 7th Street corridor from downtown St. Paul to the Mall of America, obviously serving the West 7th Street corridor, serving Terminal 1 at the airport, and then kind of connecting and serving Bloomington and connections to Blue Line there, as well as the Mall of America. The K line is recommended as Nicollet Avenue, so downtown Minneapolis, down to American Boulevard, through downtown, and then along Nicollet Avenue that entire way. And then before we name an L line, we have some additional questions about that Franklin Grand 3rd Street corridor, which I will get into here in just a moment. But then ultimately be naming an L line from one of 3 candidate corridors, which we'll talk about here as well. Additionally, and on sort of a separate path here, we want to be completing feasibility study of C line extensions. So looking at either Cedar Avenue or Bloomington Avenue on the south side of things, and then the 63rd and Zane corridor on the north side. So potentially extending the C line from Brooklyn Center Transit Center to Starlight via the Route 724. And we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. So here are those kind of recommendations at a glance, which I just kind of talked through. So advancing the J line and the K line, and then 3 additional candidate corridors to study as the L line. And we'll walk through each of these here, starting with J line and K line. So Nicollet and West 7th Street, so 2 of the top 3 highest scoring candidate corridors. Really no major outstanding questions about these corridors in terms of alignment, termini, or fit within the overall network. And we see a lot of opportunity here, and we've been working with MnDOT and St. Paul, Ramsey County, and others on kind of advancing this work in tandem with the West 7th Street project that is MnDOT led on that portion of the roadway there. We do want to acknowledge that there's a little bit of clarity needed still on the kind of alignment of Nicollet Avenue in downtown Minneapolis, and we're working kind of directly with the city of Minneapolis on that work. Circling down to the corridors then that are proposed not to advance for arterial BRT right now, we'll kind of go through these at a high level here, but just kind of talking through the rationale there for each of these. The Payne Westminster corridor is kind of again on that moderate technical evaluation results, but this corridor is really based on a pretty significant planned restructuring of the local Route 64, which folks are probably familiar with. That is planned to take place in the next couple of years and was identified through Network Now. So what that means is that we don't have a route that currently does this alignment, and there's kind of some untested performance, potential performance there for arterial BRT. So the recommendation there is to actually implement those plan changes, which are shown here in Network Now, and then kind of continue to monitor service in this area for potential future consideration. Moving on to Bloomington Avenue and Lyndale Avenue North. Here again is a pretty good scoring corridor, kind of in the top middle of the pack here. The Lyndale Avenue segment is very close to the D line, so it's within about 1/3 of a mile there. That gets into territory that's less complementary and more competing with each other for rides and for kind of access. And so looking at not advancing arterial BRT on the Lyndale Avenue North portion of this segment. On the south side, the Bloomington Avenue portion is a good candidate for consideration as a potential C line extension along with Cedar Avenue. And so we're bringing both of those corridors into that work, which we'll be completing this year throughout the rest of this year. 63rd Avenue and Zane, we're kind of working our way sort of down the technical evaluation results here. This corridor is very short. It is kind of one of the kind of challenges with this corridor. And so those benefits that kind of accrue with implementing arterial BRT, namely speed and reliability benefits associated with limited stop spacing, really sort of have trouble standing out on a corridor that's this short. That said, some of that challenge could be mitigated by potentially kind of attaching this portion of a corridor to an existing corridor. So we want to be looking at this corridor for a potential extension of the C line on the north end as well. Maybe we do start to see kind of mitigate some of those concerns. Working our way down here, we're sort of getting towards the bottom of the technical evaluation results. The Broadway Avenue corridor. Here, there's a couple of challenges with this one. One is the kind of pretty low forecast ridership and productivity so passengers per in-service hour. The other kind of major question here is really about the alignment and terminal locations of this corridor. So this corridor is based on an existing Route 30, which really serves a particular purpose, both as a crosstown route on Broadway and then kind of providing access in the mid-city industrial area and kind of near the Quarry Shopping Center, sort of over here where it gets really squiggly. That's important access, but it's not really how we try to design arterial BRT corridors, where the more turning movements you have, the slower you go, and you kind of start to lose some of that speed and reliability benefit. You start to lose some of that simplicity benefit for arterial BRT. So there's some real challenges there in that particular corridor about how to particularly approach that. So a recommendation at this point is to kind of consider that problem and explore some potential local route adjustments before doing anything with respect to arterial BRT here. The 66th Street corridor, so this is the Route 515, is another corridor that is relatively short and kind of limits that benefit for arterial BRT. And ridership here and productivity, again, is forecast to be relatively low compared to the other corridors, sort of below what we would want to see for arterial BRT. So recommendation here is to kind of continue to monitor that service and develop local service on the Route 515, which was recently restored to the high frequency level of service. And then finally, the Lowry Avenue corridor. So this is the lowest scoring corridor on our technical evaluation criteria. Again, that forecast ridership is pretty low in this corridor, below our standards for what we'd want to see for arterial BRT. And there's a significant gap in frequency of service on the Route 32 to what we would expect for arterial BRT, where we'd want to have something every 10 to 15 minutes. And that gap represents an actual opportunity, I think, to improve transit service in this corridor without or prior to implementing arterial BRT in this corridor. Or we can be looking at implementing the planned transit improvements on Network Now, so increasing up to every 20-minute service, and then potentially considering frequency improvements and span improvements on this route beyond those in the future. Finally, bringing us back to the candidates remaining to consider for the L line, which we have not yet identified in this work. So we have 3 corridors here. Additional study needed on the Franklin Grand 3rd Street corridor, which I'll talk a little bit about, and then the Johnson-Lyndale corridor and the Randolph East 7th Street corridor, which are still under consideration. So looking at the Franklin Grand 3rd Street corridor. So this corridor scored very highly in our technical evaluation results. It was among the top 3. And it's a really good corridor sort of on paper on the line on the map in terms of those evaluation criteria. There are some pretty significant unresolved questions right now that we just need to resolve before we would be confident in naming this corridor for arterial BRT. And at a high level, those are really centered around questions about compatibility of arterial BRT on Franklin Avenue. Folks are probably familiar that a portion of that corridor has recently been reconstructed, and another kind of significant portion of that corridor will begin a reconstruction this year. And it's a very narrow corridor, and there's pretty serious questions about whether or not arterial BRT infrastructure would actually fit into that right of way there. So we need to really sharpen our pencils and actually answer that question here before we would name arterial BRT in that corridor. We also have some questions about sort of the overall alignment, both kind of through the University of Minnesota area or crossing the Mississippi River. How do we actually do that? And then finally, on the east side of this corridor, there's some questions too about, is 3rd Street the right segment for this style of investment, given its proximity to the Gold Line, given the upcoming Bronze Line, or is 7th Street a better candidate? So looking at kind of what do we want the actual alignment to be on this side. So we need to actually answer those questions and spend the next year doing a corridor study on this corridor before we would be in a position to kind of either identify this corridor or another corridor as the L line. So we intend to do that work this year. Finally, another L line candidate is the Johnson-Lyndale corridor. So here we're back up sort of again, kind of in the upper middle of the evaluation results. The real challenge with this corridor is how close it is to other existing and planned metro lines. So it's within a half mile. It is exactly a half mile from both the planned F line on Central Avenue and on Johnson, and then on the south side between the E line and then between the upcoming K line as Nicollet Avenue. And so that's not a reason not to say like there should not ever be arterial BRT in this corridor, but it is a reason for us to say, is this the right next investment? Is this the corridor that's the right next investment given the level of service that's in this area already? And finally, the other remaining L line candidate is the Randolph East 7th Street corridor. This is lower on the technical evaluation results. And the other kind of real significant drawback here or consideration is the overlap between this corridor and the West 7th Street corridor and those associated roadway projects. So it's kind of a similar question of like, is this really the right next level, next corridor to be investing in? Not that we should never do it, but is this the right next one? And then obviously there's some tie-in on 7th Street between the upcoming corridor study and the definition of this corridor here as well. Putting some of these corridors in context, this is just a graph looking at the existing, so current local ridership by corridor. So on the routes that are currently serving these corridors today, what is our average daily ridership? This was in 2024. So you can see overall trend, the corridors that are advancing in some capacity here, either for additional consideration or being named as the J line or the K line, are sort of those higher ridership corridors. And then similarly, taking a look at our forecasted passengers per in-service hour. So here looking at productivity, with that TPP guidance of 25 passengers per in-service hour or more, kind of highlighting that and sort of where we would expect these corridors to land on that sort of guideline. And you can kind of see that, again, the corridors that are advancing in some capacity are either at or beyond that expectation for arterial BRT. So finally, just kind of quickly summarizing our recommendations and next steps. J line is identified as the West 7th Street corridor. K line is the Nicollet Avenue corridor. We intend to complete that additional corridor study of the Franklin Grand 3rd Street corridor this year. Following the completion of that study, we'd be recommending an L line corridor from either that corridor study result, the Johnson-Lyndale corridor, or the Randolph East 7th Street corridor. On a separate path, we're looking at completing the feasibility study for C-line extensions on both the south end of the corridor and the north end of the corridor. Upcoming work from us in terms of milestones here. So later this month and into March, we'll be bringing a business item forward to the council, recommending the J line and K line for council adoption. I will be at TAB next week, giving an abbreviated summary of these outcomes here. And then we'll be bringing forward the J line for the 2026 regional solicitation process and initiating TPP amendments to include the J line and K line, and then continuing those corridor study, that additional corridor study work. And with that, Chair, I will stand for questions.
Thanks, Kyle. Good presentation. I like all the maps for sure. That's what keeps my interest. Committee, are there any questions for Kyle? We got Kevin.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Kyle, just a question about the technical scoring criteria. One of them was cost to provide the service. Just a clarification, that's not a capital cost to build the project, is it? That's a capital cost estimated, or not, that's a cost estimated to operate the service, is that correct?
Chair, committee members, it is that overall score incorporates both of those things. So there's a capital cost element to it, as well as a kind of an annualized, annualized operating cost.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other questions? I have one or two, just out of curiosity. Not challenging anything that you're recommending here, but why is there no I line? Is that like the 13th floor of a hotel? You just don't do that?
Chair, it's a good question. It's about kind of like readability and kind of potential confusion for the number 1.
Okay. Cool. I don't know this. I just assume this is the case, but a BRT line, does that stop less than a normal bus line? It's like supposed to go further distance quicker and it has less stops. Is that true?
Chair, that's correct. That's kind of the fundamental, or one of the kind of fundamental pieces. So arterial BRT overall, maybe I should have started with a little bit of a summary of that, is sort of a more limited stop service where we kind of have high frequency service, limited stop spacing, kind of more investment at stations rather than sort of bus stops. So every station has a shelter, a pylon with real-time arrival time information, light and heat. So it's a little bit more of a comfortable waiting environment there as well.
Cool. Drew has a question.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for all of the information, Kyle. Appreciate it. Keeping in mind that it's arterial BRT, of course, and maybe a little in the weeds, but have you or the team done a lot of looking at sort of a more cross-cutting route that would link up some of the BRTs? I know hub and spoke models are super convenient for a lot of commuting, but like not necessarily the most useful for people just trying to accomplish their daily needs.
Chair, it's a great question, and yes, so I think on the so we've kind of looked at a variety of corridors that have a different kind of, I would say, a variety of purposes within the overall network. So yeah, hub and spoke, they tend to those kind of real core routes that are leading into town tend to have that higher ridership. But we also want to be making sure that we are providing those crosstown services. And I think one of the things that, let me just move us to actually sort of our, let's do a good, is that it's not each of these individual routes, while many of them do serve downtown, many of them also serve sort of a multi-purpose that includes kind of a crosstown purpose. So if you take a look at, for example, the Metro H line, right? So yes, that does serve downtown Minneapolis, but it really provides kind of that crosstown function here as well as part of that corridor.
I'm actually I'm representing Carver County, but I live in South Minneapolis, so I'm a big Beeline fan.
Right. Yeah, Beeline does a similar thing. Yeah, I'm also a Beeline user. Yeah. And so I think it sort of depends on the corridor. And I think you alluded to this a little bit earlier. These are sort of the arterial BRT services. So not like something that, in the past, the council has looked at like highway BRT study where it would operate sort of more kind of on, grade separated or kind of access controlled highways. Yep.
Cool. Yeah, I appreciate it. And thank you again. It seems like you all put a lot of good hard work into it.
Patrick, you're up.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Kyle. It was great. I had to step away for a couple minutes, so I apologize if I missed this in your general remarks, but I live along Randolph, and so this is a question that occurred to me before, and you kind of covered it. The L route, you talked about, numbers. I think it's slide 16, or no, yeah, that's it. Sorry, 26. And the current Route 74 has different spurs, and it goes to different places, different times of day. If I get on the wrong one, I end up, going elsewhere. It takes me longer to get to work. But the point is that, there's overlap here with the corridor on West 7th, and of course, as it travels south on Cleveland, hooks up with Ford Parkway with the A line. So wondering, I mean, is it possible that like current regular route service have spurs? I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the proper term, but that could just become part of another corridor and served, or would it be? Are we still in the position where this would be its own separate letter and full on corridor?
Chair, committee members, another good question. So the basic structure of arterial BRT lines is to not have branches, which is or short lines, right? So any bus you get on that is going sort of eastbound, they're all going to go to the same location. So it kind of helps with some of that simplification piece. It helps you avoid getting on the wrong bus. However, that does not mean that we wouldn't ever run two corridors, like a J line and an L line or whatever, on the same portion of roadway for a time. So there could be overlapping where like the J line and the K line both operate on, and if we were to advance this as the L line, the L line and the J line would operate, would overlap a little bit on West 7th, but they would still be thought of as separate lines.
Okay, thanks. That's kind of what I thought. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Kyle, I did have one more question, again, out of curiosity. The 25 passengers per service hours metric, which I think is a target you identified, is that the break-even target operationally, or is that not even at that break-even point? Do you know?
Chair, that depends on the route and like it's separate from like the cost per passenger. But break even is not really it's not like a standard that we're using here at transit or in most transit providers when it comes to like the fare box recovery ratio. It of course typically aligns with a higher what's called fare box recovery ratio. So how much is the fare paying for the operating? But like all modes of transportation, we're not sort of earning a profit here with that work. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I was just curious if that was even close to the break-even point, but for another discussion, I guess.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, looks like we have another question from Cole.
Yeah, Chair. Sorry, I'm not a committee member, but I wanted to see, Kyle, if you could go back to the evaluation framework, which first I want to acknowledge was put in place prior to the 2050 plan being adopted, because the study started in prior to that being fully bundled. Can you just talk about how some of these important metrics relate to the TPP goals and objectives, like the regional plan objectives, and that maybe gets at what Charlie was asking, like how do we say these are contributing to what the region's trying to achieve overall in transportation?
Chair, committee members, yeah, and so this is again sort of at a summary level, so I don't have like each specific evaluation criteria that sort of went within these kind of 4 goals listed here. But we started from the 2050 Transportation Policy Plan, and kind of knowing that work was advancing through the council at this time, kind of really started there and tried to align with the kind of the specific goals and objectives identified through that work. And so things like basically trying to translate these ridership equity costs and land use pieces back up to the 2050 Transportation Policy Plan.
Okay, do we have any more questions? Last call. Not seeing any. Kyle, thank you again.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, everyone.
On to the next item is another informational item. Jed Hansen from MTS Planning will present an overview of the scope of work for the Complete Streets Local Implementation Guide. Jed, take it away.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm sure you're all familiar with me and my TAC planning hat, but I'm also the project manager for this planning study, the Complete Streets Local Implementation Guide. Today, this presentation will cover the background and purpose of this project, provide a high-level overview of the scope of work, our proposed plan to engage with local governments in the course of this project, a rough timeline and the budget that we are working with, and provide an opportunity for discussion and our near-term next steps. So this project is intended to develop a guide to assist local governments when they're implementing complete streets concepts, both in their planning processes and in actual construction projects. So this study will assign a street type to most functionally classified roads, provide context-sensitive multimodal design guidance paired with those types, provide implementation guidance, tools, and incentives through regional funding programs, and engage through the process of its development to meet those local needs. So there are a few different reasons that this project is finding its way into our work program. First being it's specifically identified in the 2050 Transportation Policy Plan. Policy 23 concerns complete streets, and specifically Action 23D calls for creating the street typology and related technical assistance. There are upwards of 20 actions in the Transportation Policy Plan that this has either direct or loose connections to that we'll also be addressing in the course of this project. We're also addressing provisions that provide greater design flexibility in federal aid projects, starting with the FAST Act and then further widened in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. There's some more flexibility that local governments have when using federal funds on roadway projects. We'll provide some light touch guidance on how to use this flexibility, particularly in how to adapt roadway design in different land use contexts, or using roadway design as a tool to guide a future vision for the built form in an area. We'll build upon some existing tools that the Federal Highway Administration and MnDOT provide and include some lessons learned from other peers. Beginning with the 2026 Regional Solicitation and Active Transportation Solicitation, those programs will include scoring criteria that are either named complete streets or closely related to complete streets. In some of the categories, this is a substantial amount of points, up to 40% in some. During the course of this study, an application cycle will be completed. So this will provide us an opportunity to reflect on those measures and what we've learned from this study and consider any refinements that might be needed to the measures or the scoring guidance. As written, the 2026 draft application measure is qualitative and focused on safety and connectivity for people walking, biking, rolling, and taking transit. It doesn't include differential guidance based off of land use context, and it leaves it somewhat open to score discretion. This is an opportunity to both refine some of that guidance to make clear that what a complete street is varies by community context, as well as to incorporate a broader set of considerations. The umbrella of complete streets is not just about safety and connectivity. It also includes concepts like how do humans interact with the surrounding natural and built environment. Also on the topic of regional programming, these criteria are also responsive to statutory requirements to consider complete streets, policies, and practices when using funding from the regional active transportation portion of the sales and use tax. So this study presents an opportunity to check with what we've developed and ensure we're meeting statutory intent, as well as to provide some technical assistance so more communities can score well against this criteria when applying for this new source of funding. The next few slides will describe the consultant's scope of work. So the first task will create a street typology that considers factors beyond functional classification, things like land use community designation, built form, other environmental and community features. We have not defined what this will consider in the scope of work. We are leaving that open to debate and discussion through the study's technical advisory group. This is really intended to describe the street beyond just its current day function for vehicle access and to more so describe its future multimodal vision that considers the needs of people outside of vehicles, delivering and hauling freight across distances, and other needs of the surrounding environment. This will be achieved through a documented methodology that's designed to allow a first cut of automated assignment, and then we would follow it up with a manual review and change request process, including some number of in-person workshops for us to negotiate changes according to local needs and on-the-ground knowledge. We intend to apply this to all non-freeway principal arterials, minor arterials, and collectors in our region, reaching down to the collector system mostly to recognize that in many cases, the collector system may be a more logical place for multimodal users than a main arterial roadway. Alongside these street types, the guide will provide some sort of illustrative vision for each identified street. This could include some consideration of modal priorities in investment, references to detailed design guides and manuals, and common treatments for how you'd consider certain modal users. We'll also include some space in the scope for short form guidance on special topics. The slide here provides some examples of what to include. This will also be subject to further discussion and may change as the project progresses. And the image on the slide here is an example map from the Denver Regional Council of Governments, the distribution of the street types throughout their region. We acknowledge this project is not really the first of its kind, not even within our region. We seek to apply insights and build on existing guidance. So locally, the Minnesota Department of Transportation has its Complete Streets Handbook that is mostly concerned with the state system. The city of Minneapolis has a street design guide with similar street types specific to their jurisdiction. And we've reviewed a number of examples throughout the region or throughout the country at both the regional and local levels. As mentioned previously, this project will include those recommended actions for programming processes and will include space in the scope for engagement on how communities feel this should influence the regional solicitation and how we can reflect upon what we've experienced in this upcoming 2026 solicitation. A significant portion of this project is engagement to meet those local needs. We'll include a technical advisory group that has city, county, and other agency partners that meet likely every 6 to 8 weeks throughout the project to provide strategic guidance and technical review of deliverables. In all of these settings, our key audiences really are not just public works, although that's the primary one. It also would include like land use and community development planning and parks departments. The project budget is including capacity for focus groups both during the street type development process to really gain that local on the ground knowledge of how different roads function and the local vision for those roads, as well as to apply to gain knowledge on some of those special topic guidance documents that we'll include in here. This engagement could be further augmented with another contract that we have for outreach if we identify needs outside of this project scope. Specifically during the development of those street types, we are planning to have those sub-area workshops. Currently, we are investigating how we can expand the project budget to make sure that's a robust process. During the course of this project, specifically for the county partners involved, we hope to lean on some of those relationships to bring more city governments into the fold that often might not be engaged in our formal MPO processes, particularly some smaller communities that may have less of a staffing capacity. We'd be looking to work with county governments to identify the times that we should be asking for their help, who we should be reaching out to, and in those instances we can't reach those audiences, working with those county partners to understand what those local needs look like throughout the region. So to summarize, this project will produce a street types data set and an initial change request process, a guidebook document that includes methodology for assigning, updating, and changing street types, illustrative guidance for each type, and paired references to more detailed design resources, best practice summaries on special topics, and a summary of project engagement. It will also include a document of recommended actions to address complete streets in our project selection and prioritization processes. We're also providing an opportunity for prospective consultants to propose on options. So we're both leaving it open to consultant proposed options, and we also have 4 pre-identified optional tasks that we would like to consider but aren't critical within the project timeline and budget. And those topics are related to certain special design topics, the 4 minor arterial subclassifications, and providing additional technical assistance and training workshops if possible. So the next four or five slides provide examples of project deliverables from a similar MPO level example. We have reviewed some other examples, and this is not the exclusive basis of this project, but this is the most complete example that I wanted to draw some slides from. So this is a screenshot of their interactive story map application that shows the assignment of their street types and a brief pop-up description of what that type might look like. So here they describe their neighborhood connector streets, which are more for those like urban neighborhoods, first-ring suburban neighborhoods where the roadway is probably connecting a residential area to small commercial nodes or schools. And in these areas, those pedestrian and bicycle elements may raise a bit higher. Here's an example of their guidance for that type in their guidebook itself. It provides this illustration of what a street like this could be, an investment priority framework. And one of the things that we've noted in some early engagement on this project is that the messaging around how we describe different modal treatments in these street types is important, so as not to imply that any user is a low priority, but it's more so what is the investment need and intensity in these types. And then they also provide a list of common elements that you might expect to see in these corridors and those elements that might not be appropriate for those corridors. Here's another similar example. So this is called the rural road type. And in this instance, it's more so focused on vehicle access and safety, providing wide shoulders, perhaps side paths. The next slide shows an example of something we're not likely to include in our guide. So the Denver guide provides a special use street type. Think of this as your pedestrian mall, like Nicollet Mall in Minneapolis. This is really a small segment of the entirety of our functional class system in the region, and it might not be as broadly applicable, so it might not be the most efficient use of resources for this project. These are still important features to have in our region, but it's not something that we'll likely cover in depth in this guide. Another concept their guide provides resources on are local policy and planning practices. There's no way you'll be able to read this slide, but it's more so here so I can illustrate. So here, they provide a framework for what a local complete streets policy should contain and why. And then for those jurisdictions that would like to have a template policy that they can start from and amend with their needs, they provide a model policy document that could be adopted as ordinance or like a department procedure. So this project is scheduled to support the 2028 regional solicitation cycle. We're planning to finalize the scope and release the RFP this quarter. It's currently identified for $350,000 in the UPWP, though we're considering adding some additional funding in 2028 to support more local government engagement throughout the project and sequence some of the more final documents towards the end to accommodate that. In Q2, we hope to select the contractor, award the contract, and initiate the project, with the bulk of the work starting in Q3 of 2026 and extending through the end of 2027. This is the timeframe that the project's technical advisory group would meet while the main project deliverables are created. So while most of the project would be completed by the end of 2027, there would be some ongoing tasks into 2028 to implement the recommended adjustments to the regional solicitation and to facilitate local government usage of the guide. And like I said, there may be some trailing tasks in 2028 to accommodate the earlier needed items in the budget, like creation of that formatted design document and technology transfer. So our next steps with this project are to continue to engage on the project's scope of work and provide opportunity for feedback. Currently, we are having meetings with county governments and some focus groups with city governments. We'll provide, we'd appreciate feedback on this presentation by March 15th so we can efficiently advance this through our procurement process and get it on the street by the end of the quarter. Local governments can expect a call for interest to join the project's technical advisory group in the third quarter of this year. That said, if you have interest in participation and you know a likely participant, please reach out to me. I'm more than happy to hear those names early. I'll thank you for taking the time to hear the summary of this project. We're excited to hear the feedback that you may have. The discussion here is open-ended. I'll just run through a few prompts here quickly to prime the conversation. We're most interested to understand how this may fit in with your existing work practices, or if there's some conflicts you see that we need to address. What might be most helpful in your day-to-day work in developing projects and advancing complete streets concepts in your local plans. How you feel this should influence the regional solicitation, and if you have experience applying these concepts in your jurisdiction, what lessons that you can learn about the process or the outcome of the projects themselves that we could include as examples here or discuss in the course of the project. And with that, I will stop for questions. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Jed. Nice job. Pretty interesting. Definitely for a city like a city I represent. I think this would be very helpful. Open it up for questions to the committee. Patrick.
Hey, Jed, can you repeat what you said about, okay, the call for interest, great, in quarter 2026. Kind of a final product launch. I'm just thinking of the decennial plans and what cities, this would be helpful, I think. Not, I think it would be helpful anytime for them to use it, but just sort of curious, given the proximity of citizen statement issuance and people already starting to work on their plans.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Chair and Patrick, we're aware of that. So this guide will not create any new content for minimum requirements. Obviously, that we're past that point in the comprehensive planning cycle. Mostly what we'd expect to get out of this guide relative to comprehensive planning are some best practices that cities might consider and content that we could provide in advisory comments during review, but this would not introduce any new requirements in this cycle of comprehensive plan updates. Did that fully answer your question?
Sort of. That helpful what you said. But when you anticipate kind of having a final product?
Yes. So the final guidebook we'd expect to be completed in 2028. That said, the talents that we'd expect in a consultant team to address sort of the street typology task and some of the land use guidance tasks, they're different sets of skills. And so we anticipate some of these tasks could run concurrently in the earlier end of the project, and we might be able to deliver some draft content at some point in 2027. That said, we should have continued conversations about how to best support those local governments that are developing their plans for approval in 28.
Yeah, I think this will be, I appreciate your comment or framing it around minimum requirements, because that's the question I'm going to be asked. I get asked that almost every day now. But I appreciate that. And I think, it's a tool and it's going to be, just listen to you. I think it's going to be useful and people are going to do it. So I like the fact that at some point, maybe in a year and a half or 2 years from now, I get to go out and have another tool to give to people. That's always good for me. So thanks.
Looks like we got a question from Anton.
Yep. Thanks, Chair. Jed, I guess it's more of a comment rather than a question, but kind of based on what Patrick was saying, I think it would be helpful to frame this work kind of within the requirements of comp plan update. So like there's requirements for different designating different street types in the comp plan, and the more that those street types are reflected in this plan, the better, rather than having the comp plan typologies, kind of over here, and then a completely new set of complete streets typologies that may not reference that, where local jurisdictions would have to like do the mental gymnastics of like overlapping them. Like the more you can kind of bake that overlapping into the guide itself, I think would be helpful. That makes sense.
I get what you're getting at, and I'll say my land use planning knowledge is a little stale at the moment, so I'm going to take this back to the project team and talk to our folks who work on comprehensive planning to make sure we're not creating duplication. Thanks.
Cool.
Yeah, Anton, I did want to note, because we are getting questions about whether this would be a requirement, and I hear what you're saying about the piece on which I think is actually on the land use side, to have these livable street identifications. We were not necessarily intending to have this be a requirement for any local plan, because we don't want to be in conflict with something that a city has done that is more tailored to their community, which there are a few examples of. So I think this would always be something to optionally include in every comprehensive plan, and to the degree that we can even optionally request people to include it this round is really a timing question. But so we'd be more thinking about 2060 if we had any kind of more specific language around it. And that's, I think, maybe a conversation for a future discussion once people see the product and can react to it. I think we wouldn't want to commit to anything ahead of, finishing the project, but it's good feedback and stuff we have to think about.
Yeah, I mean, that's not really what I was talking about. I was thinking more of the transportation chapter requirements of, we have to designate arterials, collectors, all those, like that go into the overall network. And the more that these complete streets designations fit within that framework, the more helpful I think it will be on our end, because a collector is going to have a certain amount of characteristics that are going to be relatively consistent across the region. So, if you have 4 complete streets typologies for a collector, I think that's more helpful than having 20 complete streets typologies that may not relate to a specific, collector arterial, that kind of thing. So like whatever you break it down into, have it work within that framework that we're already designating within the transportation chapter. That's what I'm trying to get at. I don't know if that makes any more sense, but I'm happy to follow up too with you guys.
I think the 2 layers that we have are the difference between minors and collectors for sure, and then rural versus urban. Once you get within the urban area, it's kind of hard because our functional class, as Jed said, optional task is to reassess those different types of functional class. So that would have to be assessed first. But I think I get what you're saying now, and agree. It's something we'd have to address.
I got a question, Jed, or maybe a suggestion. Whether it's your working group or how you engage various agencies, but I think MnDOT state aid really needs to have a lot to do with this. And I say that because if looking ahead, there's going to be scoring criteria tied to regional solicitation for funding on some city upgrading a collector street that's on their MSA system, they have to meet state aid guidelines, right? So I just want to make sure that the outcome of this isn't in conflict with state aid guidelines, because then you're just blowing the whole thing up. So they need to be kind of part of the discussion to say, well, you're varying a little too much from what the city has to do to get their funding, if that makes sense.
Yes, well taken and understood. I'll say in the course of developing this project scope, between meeting with county, city governments, and interested consultants, we're having about 30 meetings, and I think this is about the 8th or 9th time this has been emphasized. So I appreciate that, and I probably should message that better the next time I give this presentation. Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions from the committee for Jed? Okay, see none. Thank you, Jed. Nice job. We will move on to other business. Is there any committee member that has anything they want to bring up to the table? Seeing and hearing nothing. With that, I think we're ready for adjournment. We had 2 presentations today. We got done a little early. A good meeting. Thanks for the support documents to help me out, Jed. It was much appreciated. And I will adjourn the meeting at 2:07 p.m. and we'll see everybody next month.
Thank you for standing in, Chair.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Bye.